Sometimes life doesn't shatter with noise. It just goes quiet. The kind of quiet that sits heavy on your chest like rain pressing against a window, waiting for you to look outside and finally see what you've been ignoring all along. That's how I felt the day I opened the wedding invitation. The golden letters shone in the afternoon light, spelling out names I once thought would never appear together: Camila and Connor, my fiancé, and my father's business partner. I didn't shout, didn't throw the card, didn't even cry. I just stared, tracing the edges of her name with my thumb, wondering how love could turn into something so unfamiliar, so cold, and yet still hurt like the first time. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the ticking clock, the whisper of wind, felt like memories coming back. Her laughter in my car, the way she said my name when she was shy, how she once told me, "Gavin, I don't care about money. I just want peace." But maybe peace, to her, was something money could buy. I learned later that the wedding was grand, held in a hall my father helped fund. Cameras, luxury, people wearing smiles that cost more than I earned in a year. And me, I stayed home, sitting on the porch, staring at the sky like it could answer something. Maybe it did, in its own way, by staying silent. Months passed, and I tried to rebuild myself. I took quiet jobs, stayed away from gossip, and learned to breathe again. But fate has a strange way of circling back, because one morning, 2 black cars stopped outside my house, and when the doors opened, there she was, in a white coat, eyes tired but soft, Camila. And the first thing she said wasn't hello. It was, "Gavin, we need your signature." When you grow up as the son of a billionaire, people expect your life to shine like gold. But my father's house never felt warm. It was big, yes, tall windows, polished floors, a chandelier that looked like frozen rain hanging over the staircase. But it was cold, the kind of place where sound didn't linger, where conversations were short, formal, and measured. My father, Mr. Julian, built his empire from nothing. He liked to remind me of that, not to inspire me, but to warn me. "Gavin," he'd say, "don't ever think kindness pays the bills." He believed in results, not emotions. In his eyes, money wasn't just power. It was safety, respect, control. But I wasn't like him. I didn't want a life built on deals and signatures. I wanted something quieter. Maybe that's why he thought I was weak. I remember the first time I met Camila. It was at one of my father's charity events. I was standing near the back, trying to avoid the camera flashes and shallow conversations. Then I saw her in a pale blue dress, simple yet graceful. She wasn't like the others. Her smile was real, unpolished. She didn't talk about brands or vacations. She talked about people, about her grandmother's garden, her favorite books, and how she used to draw clouds as a child because she believed everyone had a story. That night, we talked for hours. The lights faded, the guests left, and it felt like the whole world had gone quiet just for us. She told me she worked in interior design, not because it paid much, but because she loved creating warmth in cold spaces. I remember thinking how ironic that was, because my house was the coldest place I knew. Camila changed something in me. She made silence feel safe, not lonely. We started meeting often, coffee shops, small parks, anywhere far from the noise of wealth. She never asked about my last name, never cared about my father's status. She just wanted to know me, and I loved her for that. For the first time, I felt free. I told her about my dreams, how I wanted to start my own small business, not in competition with my father, but to build something honest. She would listen with those deep brown eyes, nodding softly, her hands always calm. I thought she understood me completely. When I finally told my father about her, he didn't even look up from his laptop. "What's her family name?" he asked. I told him. "Occupation?" I said she was a designer. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Designers don't marry Julians." His words cut deeper than I expected, but I stayed calm. I told him she was kind, loyal, hardworking. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear when they've already made their judgment. "Loyalty fades when comfort grows," he said. "You'll see." But I didn't see. I refused to, because when you're in love, you build your own version of truth, and mine was built around her smile. A few months later, I proposed. It wasn't fancy, just the two of us by a lake, under soft lights I'd strung myself. When she said yes, I felt like I could finally breathe. She hugged me, whispered, "You're all I ever wanted, Gavin." And I believed her. With every piece of my heart, I believed her. We started planning quietly, simple ceremony, small circle, nothing extravagant. But word somehow reached my father. One evening, he called me into his office. The smell of whiskey filled the air, and the lamplight hit his face like a half shadow. "You're marrying her anyway," he said. "Yes," I answered. He nodded slowly, almost amused. "Then you'll need to meet Connor." That was the first time I heard the name. Connor Hale, my father's longtime business partner, a man in his late 30s, smooth talker, sharp dresser, charming in a practiced way. My father often said Connor reminded him of his younger self. They invited us all to dinner. It was supposed to be a casual introduction, but I could sense something tense beneath it. Connor spoke like he owned every room he entered. He complimented Camila, asked her opinion about art and design, even teased her about her fresh eyes. She smiled politely, but I could feel her discomfort. I wanted to protect her, but I didn't want to seem insecure. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. "Learn from Connor," he said quietly. "That's how men survive in this world." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Camila slept beside me, breathing softly, her hand resting on my chest. I wanted to believe we were unshakable. But something inside me stirred, a faint whisper of doubt. Not about her, about everything else, about the world my father had built, and the people he trusted. In the weeks that followed, things changed in small, almost invisible ways. Camila started spending more time at work. She looked more tired, distracted. When I asked if something was wrong, she'd smile and say, "Just stress. Big project." I believed her, because love, when pure, doesn't question too soon. But my father was watching. He always was. And one afternoon, he said something that chilled me. "Gavin," he said, "some lessons can't be taught. They have to break you first." I didn't understand then what he meant, but soon I would. Sometimes love doesn't break suddenly. It fades the way a candle dies, not with a burst, but with a whisper, leaving behind a thin line of smoke that still smells like something once warm. That's what it felt like with Camila. The slow fading, the quiet slipping away. At first, I tried not to notice it. I told myself she was just busy, that maybe I was overthinking. Every time she smiled and said, "Don't worry, Gav," I convinced myself it was all fine. But deep down, something was changing, something I couldn't name and she wouldn't admit. Our wedding plans began to slow. She stopped talking about flower colors and dresses, and instead, she'd ask about my father, how he was, what he said, what business he was doing with Connor. At first, it seemed like innocent curiosity, but the way her eyes lingered whenever Connor's name came up, it started to bother me. Still, I trusted her. I thought love meant patience. But love also makes you blind, and I was walking straight into darkness. Connor became more frequent in our lives. He'd drop by my father's house when Camila and I were there, offering smiles that felt too polished. He'd joke about how lucky I was, how rare loyalty had become. My father always laughed. Camila would smile politely, but something in her face would soften in his direction, something I'd never seen before. Admiration? Curiosity? I didn't know. I only knew it wasn't for me. Then came the business dinner. The night everything began to unravel. My father insisted we attend. It was hosted at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, all glass and gold, like everything my father loved. Camila wore a black dress that night, simple but striking. I couldn't take my eyes off her. But the moment we arrived, she seemed distant, scanning the room, her smile rehearsed. Connor approached, greeting us with his usual confident charm. He kissed her hand, a little too slowly, and looked at her in a way that felt wrong. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. Dinner was long. My father and Connor talked business, investments, expansion, mergers. Camila joined the conversation with ease, asking thoughtful questions, laughing softly at Connor's stories. I sat there trying to participate, but it felt like I was fading into the background of my own life. After dinner, Connor offered to drop Camila home since my father wanted to discuss something privately with me. I hesitated, but she smiled and said, "It's fine, Gavin. He's heading the same way." I trusted her. That night, I waited for her call. It never came. She texted an hour later. "Sleep well." No heart, no warmth, just words. Something broke quietly inside me that night. Days turned into weeks. My father began calling me into his office more often, asking if I was still serious about marrying her. His tone was calm, but there was a strange edge to it, like he was testing me. You think she'd stay with you if you lost everything? He asked one day. Yes, I answered. He smirked, poured himself a drink, and said, then maybe it's time to find out. I didn't realize what he meant until later. A few days after that conversation, rumors spread online about my failed business attempts, posts and articles that made me look like I'd wasted my father's money. I was furious. I confronted him, but he only said, now you'll see what kind of love you have. When I told Camila about it, she looked worried, but not for me. This could ruin your father's image, she said. Not ours, not mine, his. I noticed her priorities shifting, like her compass no longer pointed toward us. One night I decided to visit her, unannounced. It was late, around 10 p.m. I'd been restless all day, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. Her apartment lights were on, curtains half drawn. When she opened the door, her surprise looked genuine, but her voice trembled. Gavin, you should have called. I smiled softly. I just wanted to see you. Inside, there was a faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine. A glass of whiskey on the table, half full. I looked at her. You had company. She hesitated. Just a client meeting. He left a while ago. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But deep down, I felt something shift. The quiet acceptance that love may already be leaving. That night, we barely spoke. We lay beside each other, bodies close, hearts far. And for the first time since I met her, I couldn't feel her warmth. A month later, my father threw another party, this one celebrating a new merger. Connor was there, of course, and so was Camila. Only this time, she wasn't standing beside me. She arrived with Connor. When I asked her later why, she said, your father invited me through him. It was a business thing. But the way they stood together, the way she laughed at his words, the ease in their body language, it didn't look like business. It looked like two people comfortable with secrets. My father watched me from across the room, eyes cold but knowing. When I finally approached him, he said something I'll never forget. I warned you, Gavin. Loyalty fades when comfort grows. He didn't even sound angry, just, right? Weeks turned into months. Camila grew more distant, and I stopped trying to fix it. Love, I realized, shouldn't feel like begging. Then one morning, I received a message, short, sharp, and final. I think we need time apart. Time apart. 2 words that echoed louder than any scream could. I didn't reply. I just packed a small bag and left town for a while, stayed by the coast where no one knew me. I spent my days walking along the shore, thinking about everything I'd done wrong. Was I too soft? Too patient? Or maybe she never loved me for who I was, only for what I represented. When I finally came back home 2 months later, my father was waiting. He was calm, sipping tea in the garden. She's gone, isn't she? I asked. He nodded slightly. Yes, married last week. I froze to who? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, the kind of look that carries both pity and victory. Then he said, Connor Hale. I remember feeling nothing at first. Just a hollow silence, like my emotions were somewhere else. Then slowly, it sank in the reality that the woman I loved was now bound to the man my father admired most. It felt like betrayal had wrapped itself around me from both sides. Love and blood. I wanted to hate them, both of them, but all I felt was tired. My father didn't comfort me. He didn't even explain. All he said was, now you know what I meant, and walked away. In the following months, I tried to rebuild what was left of me. I started a small furniture business, nothing grand, just wood and heart. It was my therapy, my silence. Every table I made, every chair I carved, felt like a piece of peace returning to me. Sometimes I'd see their pictures online, Connor and Camila at events, hand in hand, smiling for cameras. I'd scroll past them quietly, telling myself she looked happy, and that should be enough. But deep down, I knew happiness built on betrayal doesn't last long. Still, I never reached out. I never confronted them, because sometimes silence is the only dignity left to hold. And then, one morning, everything circled back. It was almost a year later. I was in my workshop, hands dusty with sawdust, when I heard the sound of cars pulling up outside. 2 black vehicles, expensive, sleek, out of place in my quiet street. The door opened, and there she was, Camila, dressed in white, her eyes softer, older, full of something between regret and fear. And beside her, Connor, she whispered my name like it hurt. Gavin, we need your signature. When she said those words, we need your signature, I didn't understand at first. It sounded almost absurd. After everything that had happened, after all the silence and the wreckage, why would she come back now, standing beside the man she'd chosen over me? Connor spoke first. His voice still had that same smoothness, but it trembled underneath. Gavin, he said, we just need to talk. It's business-related. I stood there in my workshop, sawdust floating between us like soft snow. The smell of wood and varnish filled the air, a sharp contrast to the cold world they came from. Camila's eyes darted around the small room, the unfinished chairs, the cluttered tools, the quiet simplicity of my new life. She looked almost out of place there, almost like she didn't belong anymore, and maybe she didn't. Still, I nodded slowly. All right, talk. Connor cleared his throat. Your father's company, Julian Enterprises, is going through some changes. We're restructuring ownership documents. Your name is still on a few of them from the trust your father created years ago. I stayed quiet. He continued, we just need your signature to finalize the transition. It's standard procedure. I looked at him, then at her. Camila's face was pale, her lips trembling slightly. She couldn't meet my eyes for long. So that was it. Not a visit of remorse, not a word of apology. Just paper, money, power. The same things my father built his life on, and the same things that destroyed mine. I smiled faintly, more out of disbelief than anger. And why didn't my father come himself? Connor exchanged a quick glance with Camila before answering. Mr. Julian, he's in the hospital. My chest tightened. Hospital? Camila nodded. He had a mild stroke 2 weeks ago. He's stable now, but he can't handle the paperwork. Connor's been managing things. The air in the room grew heavy. My father, the man who believed emotions were weaknesses, now lying in a hospital bed, fragile and human. I looked down at my hands, stained with dust and work. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. The last time we spoke, he told me love fades with comfort. Maybe he was right. But I never thought he'd fade too. Connor placed a brown folder on my workbench. All we need is your signature here. It'll transfer your remaining shares and finalize his business handover. I didn't touch it. Instead, I asked softly, and what happens after I sign? Connor hesitated. Well, technically, it gives Camila and me majority control over the company. We've been running operations since Mr. Julian fell ill. I nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. They didn't just want my name. They wanted my father's empire. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Camila stepped forward, her voice shaking. Gavin, it's not what you think. This isn't about greed. It's about keeping everything together. Your father trusts us. He said it was the only way. Her words were soft, but they cut like glass. My father trusted them. The same man who never trusted me. I turned away for a moment, facing the small window in my workshop. Outside, the trees were moving in the wind, their shadows brushing against the glass. I used to believe that love could survive anything. Distance, judgment, time. But standing there, I realized that love could die quietly too, replaced by ambition, by pride, by fear. When I turned back, I met her eyes. Tell me something, Camila, I said gently. Did you ever love me, or was I just a lesson on your way to comfort? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked down, tears welling. I did love you, she whispered finally. But your world, your father's world, it scared me. I thought if I married into it, I could learn to survive it. I thought Connor could help me do that. I almost laughed. Not out of humor, out of exhaustion. Survive, I said. Camila, I was trying to escape that world, and you ran right into it. Connor shifted uncomfortably. Gavin, enough of the past. This isn't personal. Just sign the damn papers. I looked at him calmly. His face was tighter now, his confidence wearing thin. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You know, I said, my father once told me some lessons have to break you first. Maybe this was mine. I placed my hand on the folder but didn't open it. Tell me honestly, Connor, are you and Camila happy? He hesitated. His jaw clenched slightly before he forced a small smile. Of course. But Camila looked away. Her silence said everything his words tried to hide. Something inside me softened, not toward them, but toward myself. For the first time, I didn't feel small in front of them. I felt free. I pushed the folder gently back toward him. "I'll read it," I said. "If it's fair, I'll sign. But not today. Not like this." Connor started to protest, but Camila touched his arm. "Let's go," she whispered. "He needs time." They turned to leave. At the door, she stopped and looked back at me. "Gavin, he still talks about you," she said quietly. "Your father. He said he wished you'd visit." Her eyes softened. "You should go see him, before it's too late." Then she left. That night, I couldn't sleep. The folder sat on my desk, untouched. I just stared at it, remembering everything my father's words, Camila's laughter, Connor's smirk. The man I used to be felt like a ghost watching from the corner of the room. By morning, I made a decision. I drove to the hospital. My father looked older, smaller than I remembered. Tubes and machines surrounded him, but his eyes still had that familiar sharpness. When he saw me, he managed a weak smile. "You came," he said. I sat beside him. "They told me, you're not well." He nodded slightly. "That's life, son. You build walls high enough, one day they trap you inside." We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the sound of the monitors. Then he said, "Connor's been handling things. He's good at what he does." "And Camila?" I asked softly. He looked away. "She's learned to play the game." I studied his face. For the first time, he looked regretful. "Was it worth it?" I asked. "All the power, all the control." He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Ask me again when I can stand without help." And then, in a quieter voice, "I was hard on you, Gavin. I wanted you to be strong. But maybe I made you lonely instead." Those words hit harder than I expected, because beneath all his pride, I heard something I'd never heard before. 2 days later, I called Connor and told him to meet me. We met at a lawyer's office. He was confident again, smiling like he'd already won. When the lawyer handed me the papers, I took my time reading every word. Connor grew impatient. "It's the same thing we told you. Nothing's changed." But I noticed something, a clause hidden deep in the document. It mentioned full transfer of ownership, including assets my father hadn't yet approved. I looked up. "You tried to sneak this in?" Connor shifted. "It's standard language." I shook my head. "No, it's a theft written in fine print." He smirked. "No one's going to believe you. You're just a carpenter now." I leaned back calmly. "Maybe, but this carpenter still has shares, which means this company can't move forward without me." He froze. I closed the folder and handed it to the lawyer. "I'm not signing. Not until my father recovers and speaks for himself." Connor's smile vanished completely. He stood abruptly. "You'll regret this." I looked him in the eye, voice quiet. "I already have. For years, but not anymore." He left, slamming the door behind him. Later that evening, I went back to the hospital. My father was awake, watching the sunset from his window. "You didn't sign," he said softly. "No," I replied. He nodded slowly, a faint trace of pride in his eyes. "Good. Maybe I chose the wrong people to trust, but not the wrong son." I didn't know what to say. I just sat beside him, watching the light fade. That was the first time in my life he reached out and held my hand. His grip was weak, but his silence said everything. A week later, news broke that Connor had been caught using company funds for personal investments. Camila's name was tied to the accounts too, though she claimed she didn't know. My father's lawyers took over the case, and slowly, everything Connor had built began to fall apart. I didn't rejoice. I didn't feel victorious, just calm, because sometimes life doesn't need revenge. It simply lets truth reveal itself quietly, perfectly, in its own time. And for the first time in a long while, I felt peace begin to return. I remember that week like a long exhale. Everything that had been boiling for years, the pain, the anger, the humiliation, finally settled into stillness. It wasn't happiness exactly, just peace, a kind of fragile calm that comes after you stop expecting apologies. The news about Connor spread quickly. My father's lawyers uncovered more than anyone expected fake accounts, hidden transfers, contracts forged under my father's name. It was all laid bare, quiet and merciless. Connor's empire of charm collapsed overnight. Investors withdrew. Partners vanished. And the people who once smiled at his jokes now refused to even take his calls. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Because sometimes the most powerful justice is watching people trip over the very traps they set for others. A few days later, Camila showed up again, not in designer clothes this time. She looked smaller somehow. Her eyes no longer sparkled with confidence or pride. She stood at my workshop door, just as she had the first time, except now, the silence between us carried 1,000 unsaid things. "Gavin," she said quietly, "I had nowhere else to go." Her voice broke on the last word, and even though part of me still ached, I stepped aside. "Come in." She sat at the same wooden table I used for carving. Her hands trembled as she held a small cup of tea I offered her. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "They froze my accounts. Connor's gone. He left the country 2 nights ago." I nodded slowly. She looked up at me, eyes wet. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" I smiled faintly. "No. I just knew that truth always finds its way home." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I thought I was making the right choices. Your father said I wasn't enough for you, that you'd always be miserable if you lived small. And Connor, he promised I could keep what I worked for, that I wouldn't lose myself in your shadow." Her words hung in the air, raw and trembling. I listened quietly. Then I said softly, "Camila, you never had to fight for worth. You already had it. But you traded it for approval, and approval doesn't last." She covered her face and began to cry quietly at first, then deeply, the kind of crying that comes from realizing the damage you can't undo. And I didn't interrupt her. I just let her cry, because forgiveness doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it's just the act of letting someone be human in front of you. When she calmed down, she whispered, "Do you hate me?" I thought about it, really thought. There was a time I did. When I saw her name next to Connor's on that golden invitation, I thought I'd never feel anything but hate again. But time and distance had changed me. So I said the truth. "No, Camila, I don't hate you, but I can't love you the same way either." She nodded slowly, her eyes soft but full of pain. "I understand." For a moment, she looked around my workshop, the rough wood, the unfinished projects, the quiet. "It's peaceful here," she murmured. "You built something real." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. After she left, I sat alone for a while. The sound of her car fading down the street felt like the final page of a long, painful chapter closing. That night, I visited my father again. He was getting stronger, able to sit up without help. When he saw me, he gave a small smile. "You handled it well," he said. I chuckled softly. "You mean I didn't lose my temper?" "No," he said. "You didn't lose your soul. That's harder." He reached for a small folder on his bedside table and handed it to me. "These are your shares," he said. "You'll control the company when I'm gone, but do with it what I couldn't." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked out the window, the evening light brushing across his face. "Build something that has warmth, not just worth." His words settled deep inside me. For the first time, I saw my father not as the man who'd tested me, but as the man who'd finally learned something himself. Over the next few months, I helped restructure the company, but I didn't run it like he did. I visited the workers, walked through the factories, listened to people. I brought in fair policies, paid debts my father had ignored. Slowly, the company began to feel human again. My father watched quietly, often sitting in the garden with a blanket over his lap, smiling faintly when he saw me come home late. "You're doing good work," he'd say, and I'd reply, "I'm just fixing what was broken." But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the business I was fixing. It was something in me, and maybe something in him too. Camila reached out once more, this time by letter. She wrote from a small town up north where she'd moved to start over. Her words were gentle, remorseful. "Gavin, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you. You could have destroyed me, but you didn't. Maybe that's what real love looks like, quiet mercy." I folded the letter and kept it in a drawer, not because I wanted to remember the pain, but because it reminded me of who I never wanted to become. One evening, months later, I stood on the same porch where I'd once held her wedding invitation in my hand. The sky looked the same, pale gold, fading into dusk. But I felt different, lighter. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm. My father joined me, leaning on his cane. "You've changed," he said. "Maybe," I smiled. "Or maybe I just stopped trying to fix what people break on purpose." He nodded slowly. Sometimes, letting go is stronger than holding on. We stood there together, two men who'd spent too long chasing control and finally learned that peace doesn't need ownership. A few weeks later, he passed away quietly in his sleep. No grand goodbyes, no final drama. Just silence, the same silence that had filled our house all my life. But this time, it felt like rest, not regret. At his funeral, I saw faces from every part of his life, businessmen, workers, old friends. Among them stood Camila, dressed in gray, head bowed. She didn't come close, and I didn't expect her to. But as the service ended, she glanced at me from afar. Our eyes met for a brief second, not as lovers, not as strangers, but as people who had survived something. She gave a small nod, and I returned it. That was enough. After everything, I decided not to stay in the city. I sold most of my shares, kept a modest part, fourth workers, and moved back near the coast, the same place I had gone when my heart first broke. There, I opened a small workshop again, this time teaching others how to build, young men, old men, women who wanted to learn the craft. All of them came with their own stories, their own brokenness. And as I taught them how to sand, wood, and fit joints together, I realized that's what healing is, learning to build again, slowly with your own hands. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, a young man asked me, "Mr. Gavin, do you ever regret letting them go? Your father, your fiancée, your old life?" I thought about it. The question lingered in the air like the last light of day. Then I smiled. No, I don't regret letting them go. I'd only regret if I hadn't learned from them. He nodded, maybe not fully understanding, but one day he would. That night, I wrote in my journal something I hadn't done in years. The words came easily, quietly. Some people teach you love. Some teach you loss. And some, without meaning to, teach you who you really are. I closed the book, placed it on the shelf, and sat by the window. The air smelled of salt and pine. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole, not because life had been kind, but because I'd learned to be gentle with it. Years have passed since everything happened. Sometimes, when I walk along the beach near my home, I think about how much a single signature can change the course of a life. Back then, my father and Camila needed my name to survive the storm they helped create. But what they never realized was that paper wasn't the real contract. The real signature was the one I placed on my own heart. When I chose peace over pride, mercy over revenge, I've learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength in its purest, quietest form. Because when you forgive, you free yourself from the weight of what they did. You stop waiting for justice to make you feel whole. You become whole anyway. I still think of Camila sometimes, not with longing, but with a kind of soft acceptance. She was young, like I was. We both made choices we thought would protect us. She wanted stability. I wanted love. Neither of us was wrong. We were just searching for it in different directions. And my father, Mr. Julian, he left behind more than wealth. He left behind a lesson, one that took both of us a lifetime to learn. Money can build walls, but it can't build peace. He tried to buy strength for me through loss, but life taught it to me through pain. I used to think he ruined me by making Camila choose. Now I know he gave me something far more precious, the chance to see love without illusion. Sometimes people visit my workshop now. They don't come to buy anything. They come to talk, to sit in silence, to let the sound of carving would calm them. And every once in a while, someone asks about the stories behind the things I make. One afternoon, a young woman picked up a small wooden heart I'd carved and asked, "Why do you make everything by hand? You could use machines. It'd be faster." I smiled and said, "Because healing doesn't happen fast. You have to touch it, feel it, and make peace with every rough edge." She smiled back, and I realized that's exactly what life is. We're all just carving our way through time, learning how to smooth the sharp parts, how to forgive the cracks. Some evenings, when the workshop is quiet and the sea wind slips through the open window, I sit by the fire and think about the young man I used to be, the one who loved with his whole heart, the one who got betrayed and still chose kindness, the one who walked away not because he stopped caring, but because he finally started caring for himself. And I whisper to that younger version of me, "You made it. You learned what love really means. Love isn't about possession. It isn't about promises or perfect endings. It's about what survives after everything else falls apart. Your character, your peace, your ability to keep your heart open. Camila lost her home. My father lost his empire. Connor lost his name. But I found something they never had. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from staying true to who you are. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening to this story, it's this. Don't measure your worth by who chooses you or who leaves you. Measure it by how gently you keep walking when the world turns its back. Because in the end, love isn't proven by grand gestures or signed papers. It's proven by what remains when everything else is gone, the quiet strength, the soft heart, the courage to begin again. And that, my friend, is the kind of wealth no one can take away. In the end, wealth can't measure the worth of love.